Are you skeptical? Does it seem like a stalling tactic?
I think a famous American president once said, trust but verify. You have to take it with a grain of salt initially, but between the statements that we saw from the Russians, the statement today from the Syrians, this represents a potentially positive development, and my preference consistently has been a diplomatic resolution to this problem.
President Reagan had a several hours or whatever effort to send a message to Gaddafi in the wake, I think, of Pan Am 103 and other terrorist activities.
Wow. Both President Obama and Secretary Kerry invoking President Reagan in different ways to help sell the White House's Syria plan. Joining us now on set, which is perfect timing, Reagan biographer Craig Shirley.
I guess we've entered a new cycle.
One of his 12,000 books is Reagan's Revolution.
Reagan biographer.
11,990. Oh, I'm sorry.
So, John, Reagan biographer doesn't really.
No, it doesn't capture it. Doesn't capture it.
Doesn't capture it.
No, it's like saying Reagan was a small public figure. Craig has forgotten more about Ronald Reagan than most of us have known.
He wrote a new book in the green room.
He did. There's a 900. His book on the 1980 campaign is a classic. It's only 900 pages.
Oh, great.
So on the sand, when you're on the beach, when I was on the beach, it was a little tricky. Once in a while, with the drink.
That's what e-readers are for.
I kept it.
Makes it a very good doorstop.
No, it's a fantastic.
Very good doorstop.
All right, let's go to the Washington Post for our must-reads. This is interesting. The title: "The World Now Has the Chance to End War in Syria," by President Jimmy Carter. And he says this: "Some have predicted catastrophic consequences to the credibility of President Obama and our country if Congress were to reject his request for approval of military action against the Assad regime in Syria. These dire predictions are exaggerated. It is no reflection on the president that he expressed his decision clearly to our citizens and to the world, properly sought congressional concurrence, and has done his utmost to implement his decision by securing necessary votes in the House and Senate. All U.S. presidents have been forced to endure highly publicized rejections of major proposals concerning both domestic and international issues. This is to be expected in any democratic nation, as has occurred recently in Britain and might soon happen in France."
So, Jon Meacham, President Carter, stating that this is a pathway to peace. And at the end of the day, despite the ugliness, despite the fumbling,
this is a national conversation.
Despite all the mistakes of the administration over the past 2 weeks, this is where we find ourselves. There may be a pathway to peace.
I think so. Again, I don't think that anyone would have scripted this, but given this is reality.
How do you script foreign policy based on a gaffe?
Well,
stop.
But it's.
It is.
I do think the administrator, the president. I don't know. I don't want to broaden it past that. Has made the best of a bad hand. Now, he may have dealt himself the bad hand. We can torture that metaphor. Right. We can take that to Guantanamo all you want. Right. But what I do think has happened is he gave a pretty straightforward, somewhat dissonant speech last night, but it's a dissonant moment. And again, I think just as a listener, I appreciated that he seemed to let us inside. This is really hard. No one has no one except people who are deeply certain and deeply ideological have an answer.
Craig Shirley.
I agree
Craig Shirley, you've obviously been against intervention in Syria, like a lot of conservatives from the beginning. What are your feelings this morning after it looks like we have averted, at least temporarily?
I'm looking at it from the outside, not from the perspective of the New York Times. But I think the American people are going to come away with two things. One, maybe we're not going to bomb Syria after all. And two, there is some kind of, as John said, a pathway to peace. And I think that, as far as the content and the delivery, I would give him a gentle C. But as far as what he was saying to the American people last night, I thought it was fairly good, actually.
But it's a pathway to peace for us. It's not a pathway to peace for the Syrians.
But that's what the American people care about.
Well, but let's, his objective, his being Obama's objective all along, is to prevent the use of chemical weapons, not to overthrow Assad. I think he may well achieve the former. He's not going to achieve the latter. And to rely on Putin is something you don't like to do. But I really do believe. I talked to a Russian. I haven't talked to Mika Brzezinski yet, so I don't know what I think.
Hear what he has
when he tells me what I think.
Let's see what the polls tell
No. When he tells me what I think, I may revise this view. But I talked to one Russian expert last night who doesn't like Putin, who says, look, this elevates him. If he makes this work, and it may not be at a huge cost, Assad's still going to rule the place, even without most of his chemical weapons. So I'm not quite as pessimistic as some people are without agreeing you can't trust Putin.
And in terms of the speech, Craig, isn't it fair that he laid out every dynamic that is happening, every layer of this, treating the American people like they're not dumb, that they can handle a convoluted situation, which foreign policy is? And is it a little unfair to say we've stumbled our way into this? The president went abroad. He's been working on both levels, and here we are.
I think that...
Craig, it's okay to say we stumbled our way into it.
But we stumble our way into everything. It's because there's human beings involved. Starting in July 4th, 1776, into April of 1861, we always stumble, whether it's war or diplomacy. None of this is pretty and none of this is perfect because you've got human beings involved. So, and it's the same way with this, but maybe the administration will stumble their way through, as I said before, a path to peace so that we don't end up dropping bombs on Syria.
And this does, to go to Koki's point, I mean, this does, if in fact this works, it goes to what we've defined as our national interest. We talk about the humanitarian side. I actually disagree with the president last night. He said the reason we are an exceptional nation is because we care about other people. That's actually, sometimes we care. But sometimes
we care more when it's in our self-interest to care.
Right.
And there's oil under the ground.
And to use a phrase that I think Craig might have run across once or twice, we are a shining city on a hill. But when you really think about that image, it means that there are people out there looking up and out and aspiring, not necessarily meaning that we're going in and saving them at every point.
Craig, before we leave, we've got to mark a moment, the Republican Party, the development of the Republican Party. You and I have been on one side. Not in this current conflict, but been on one side of the Republican Party and have been more non-interventionist than we've seen over the past 12 years. The Republican Party moved far away from where we were in the 1980s under Reagan, where we were in the 1950s under Ike, where we were in the 1990s even. It's safe to say the neocons are on the run. And this last crisis has shown they are, at least until another Republican president is sworn in, they're in the overwhelming minority of this Republican Party. This is a sea change.
Yeah, there was a poll that came out yesterday, a week ago. Republicans were fairly divided on whether or not to go into Syria. I think it was 40 to 35, and as of yesterday, it was 70 to 20 against. I think the party is reverting back to its traditional cautionary foreign policy of Reagan's, which was the projection of American power to defend American interests, but otherwise is to stay back. But this Syria is going to set up a whole new debate inside the Republican Party, and the new refugees of American politics may be the neocons.
Joe, I mentioned I was with Buck McKeon last night, who represents Simi Valley for the Reagan Library, and said not a single constituent supports Obama going there.
I just
Craig
haven't heard
Shirley,
one.
Thank you so much.
Good
to have you and your 12,000 books on board here.